Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Catholic Answers Live. Probably getting ready, or maybe you're already on your Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day, the traditional start of American summer. So it's getting closer and closer to that summertime. You can almost start wearing white. Not quite yet. We got a great show for you today. Second hour, Rod Bennett's going to be here. We're going to talk about the early church. We're going to talk about, that sometimes we hear that story of the early church, that it fell away from the true and simple Christian faith of Jesus and became something else. That is a myth, and we can show you why that's a myth. And you're just going to love Rod Bennett. You're going to love having him here. This hour, we're going to talk about evangelizing, particularly to teens, youth, young adults at that level, because that's where we're facing our challenges to evangelization. And I suppose if we get that right, a lot else will go right for us as well. To help us do that this hour is our very good friend, Dr. Stacy Trasancos. She's a Catholic educator, author, and scientist. She has a doctorate in chemistry from Penn State University, a master's degree in dogmatic theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary. That is why I will be referring to her as scientist and theologian Stacy Trasancos throughout the show. Right now, she works as the executive director of the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization in Tyler, Texas. And she's the author of several books, including Science Was Born of Christianity and Particles of Faith. Scientist and theologian Stacy Trasancos, thanks for being with us.
Hello, thanks for having me back on the show. I always love doing this.
So you are the executive director, or as you succinctly put it to me before the show, the boss lady of the St. Philip Institute. Do you have the same problem there in East Texas that we have here in Southern California, which is we're struggling to somehow communicate the faith in a convincing way, at least in a way that they're willingly choosing it, to many of our young people?
Yes, I'm very, very much personally invested in this, not just as director of Bishop Strickland's Catechetical and Evangelization and Institute, but also because I'm going to have 4 teenage daughters in our house in 2020. We have 2 teenage daughters now and 2 preteens. And I have 2 older children and a younger son underneath them. So I very much care about this because I converted to Catholicism to find the answers. I realized that it was the fullness of the truth. I fell in love with doctrine and dogma, and I studied dogmatic theology, got a master's degree while I was chasing my toddlers when those babies were all small and I was being open to life. And I wanted to raise them in the Catholic faith. And for a long time, I had this idea that if I just said and did all the right things, my children would turn out to be good Catholic children, and I would be a good Catholic mom. It was kind of an immature attitude, and I think, it's normal to go through that phase. But what I learned is that if you teach your children to think and search for the truth, that's what they'll do. And it almost set them up for an even harder adolescence because they see things in the fullness of the reality. They've been taught to do that. They understand that our purpose on earth is to get to heaven. And they go out in this culture and they encounter things that, as hard as I tried, I got a master's degree so I could teach them. As hard as I tried, I still didn't think they were ready for what they encountered. And it was kind of heartbreaking seeing them deal with it. Things like homosexuality, what does the teenager do when she's got friends all around her who they're friends with her and then they decide they're homosexual? What does she do about that? How does she, she can't, we've had this discussion many times. She can't just say, love the sinner, hate the sin, because that just doesn't fly with her friends.
Right,
And
right.
she wants to know how to talk to them. And it's all kinds of things like that. There's cutting, there's suicide, there's drug addiction, there's vaping and Juul pods and all these things. And what I would like to do is start a conversation among other parents about how to evangelize our youth in our culture today. Because a lot of the things that my children face, I don't find much help. I find plenty of help in natural law and doctrine and all of that, but I don't find much help on I guess a lower level of boots on the ground, to keep them in the Catholic Church. And I don't want my children to do what I did. Is, I left the Baptist faith when I was a teenager because I didn't get answers that made sense to me. I don't want my children to do that too. And I do think there's a gap in how we're evangelizing, not just to young people, but how we're bringing, as Bishop Strickland puts it, the eternal shining truths off the hill and bringing it to the people where they are without compromising, without watering down, but still reaching people. And I do pull on my scientific background here because I started writing about science and faith when I realized this was an evangelization issue. And I think a lot of the same method can be applied in that if we're confident in our faith and we're confident in what we pray in the creed and we know what the church teaches, all the natural law, all the church teachings, we have to use that confidence and not be afraid to dive into the culture as it is and meet people where they are, knowing that that's not watering down. That's meeting someone in confidence and saying, let me be your friend, let me help you. And fundamentally, as a parent, as an evangelist, that's what it's all about, is getting to know the person in front of you.
888-318-7884 is our number if you'd like to talk with our guest, Dr. Stacy Trasenkos, about overcoming those obstacles that we face now to evangelization. There are a whole bunch of challenges in front of us, and we'd like to help you negotiate those and maybe learn from you as well how you are negotiating those challenges to evangelization. Dr. Trasenkos, in addition to being a scientist and theologian, is also the boss lady of the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization there in Tyler, Texas. Again, 888-318-7884, the number 888-31-TRUTH. You mentioned some things that are quite harsh, and it's almost as there's a kind of cognitive dissonance when you're talking about these things like, certainly just this week we heard about horrible statistics about teen girls and suicide. And then you were talking about cutting and you're talking about these other things. But these are actually not, these aren't the extremes. These are what the average teenager, that's kind of the waters the average teenager is swimming in. If we don't get in and swim in those waters with them, then it's pie in the sky what we're talking about.
It is. And, my daughter, the one that's 15, she's my third child. She knows I'm talking about this because she and I talk about it a lot, and she wants me to do something about it. But I ask her, what does the church need to do to, what are your problems? What's it like for you? Tell me about it.
Yeah.
And, she said to me when we were driving, you know how parents talk when you're driving, she said, if the church cares so much about keeping teens in the church, why doesn't anyone talk about the things we deal with that are the hardest?
Oy, boy.
I'm like, I was gonna say, well, we do, but she's like, Mom, don't start talking about natural law and all that, because I've heard that all my life growing up. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what do I do? And, I have a whole group of friends that decided they were homosexual. I can't stop being friends with them. Right. But I don't agree I understand why it's wrong. And I'm not going to, she understands that. She's not going to change her mind about that. But she, what is she supposed to do to still be like the how part? Right.
That's, I wonder if we're not good at answering that question because we're not good at answering it for ourselves. How am I supposed to live as a Christian now, given what society has become?
And as hard as we tried not to, my daughter very definitely has this idea that unless you fit a certain mold and say certain things and look certain ways, you're not a good Catholic child. And it's frustrating for her because she wants to be who she is, which is, just herself. She wants to be, and that's what a parent has to do, is raise your child, raise them up to be who they're supposed to be, the fullness of the truth. Even if they turn away, you got to be confident. I'm here. I'm telling you the truth. I'm here to help you, though. And, I asked her to say more. And she said, the way you make it sound, Mom, is like, I couldn't invite my friends to church. And it sounds like the church is, if the church wants more kids to be coming, you can't be like, you can't imagine if doctors at the emergency room stood out on the street and said, hey, all you broken people, you guy over there with your broken leg, goodness, you broke your leg and look what you did. Why don't you come in here and let us fix you? Hey, you man with the broken heart. She
Yeah.
said if doctors made people feel ashamed of being broken,
Yeah.
they wouldn't want to come into the hospital.
That's why people don't like going to
And
car mechanics, because they always tell you, how could you have done this to your car? And you're like, I don't know anything about cars, man. You fix it. Don't make me feel bad. Yeah, we can't be the car mechanics of evangelization, where if someone comes in with a problem, we treat them like, how could you have allowed this to happen to your car? Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. We're talking about challenges to evangelization. There are a few out there. But we're not dumb. We can figure out how to overcome them if we work together. Give us a call, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live is proudly supported by CatholicChemistry.com, a new dating site for Catholics who want to do dating right and believe relationships start with Catholic chemistry. Catholic Answers Live thanks CatholicChemistry.com for their generous support on the web at CatholicChemistry.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Morning Glory. It's Catholic from coast to coast.
And even miracles have a kind of a short life. Shroud of Turin is a living miracle among us. The Guadalupe, Tillamook, peel me another grape. It's like,
Another grape.
kind of force me to believe. No, that's not the way it works. God's not going to do that.
That's so true. I mean, it's all these signs and all these wonders, and still people refuse to believe.
Morning Glory. Talking about everything important to today's Catholic. Monday morning, 7 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Scientist and theologian Stacy Trasancos, our guest this hour. She's the executive director of the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization. And we're here to talk about the challenges to evangelization these days, especially evangelizing young people. And you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. So I kind of interrupted you there at the end before we had to go to a break, but your daughter's point was that we can't be at the same time inviting people, I guess, and judging them. Is that kind of where she was going?
Yes, and I know we talk about it all the time as adults, but I still don't think we're talking about it in the right way for teens.
Okay.
I don't think that we're getting through to what it means, because I have to be honest. I was living in New York, I was living in Massachusetts, and before that, and now we live in Texas. I don't see a lot of the broken people in church. Right. We're all broken. We all are sinners, but I don't know that I just want to start a conversation, because and I can give another example is like in junior high. I've talked to several parents across the country from West Coast to East Coast, North and South, who say that this is something that's happening in junior high now, is that kids that have grown up in this day and age think they have to wonder, am I homosexual or am I not? That's
right.
Like a normal thing they think about.
Right.
And I don't remember growing up that way. But these kids, I was asking a principal about it the other day, like, tell me what you see, what's happening. She said almost every girl, especially the girls, they for a while think they're gay, because they go through this phase where they look at the popular girls and they have boyfriends, and I'm generalizing, they have boyfriends, and the other girls they're going through this awkward, insecure stage, and they say, well, boys must not like me, but I have this girlfriend and we're very close and she likes me, and I guess we're both gay. And so they and then they get rebellious and they're like, don't tell me I can't be. It's something that's happening. And, we were advised, even in our own family, don't freak out. Just stay cool.
I
Tell your
can't.
child you love them unconditionally, and it'll pass. And it does. It passes. But they go through this phase.
Well, and they also the transgender thing now. Many young people have to pass through that, which is for most people, I imagine, passing through these things, throughout the history of the world might have been, in the matter of an afternoon, or I need to reason this out for myself, or figure out who I am and where I am. But now I may have told you this story, Stacy. I told it to somebody on the air, but one of our friends' daughter told her that she's a lesbian, and then she was a little bit stressed about that. And her son, the girl's brother, said, "Don't you know that all the girls have to be lesbian for a while now? Like and it's not to insult them or make fun of them, but it is really kind of like they don't know what an intense friendship is, or or they go through a drama like you were just describing, and they don't know. And if we don't talk openly about that, if we're so squeamish we can't talk about that, then we are in trouble."
Indeed. And I, if we freak out about it and we start throwing all these natural law, I don't mean to pick on natural law. I love natural law. I rely on it. But if we just freak out and throw these arguments at them, like, oh no, how can the advice that I heard that I really thought was good, and was just stay calm. Stay calm. Say, I love you no matter what. Focus on the love. Focus on, let us help you raise you to be who you're supposed to be. Because if we had turned it into something to be freaking out about, it would have caused a rebellion.
Yeah.
And it might have done more harm,
of course,
than good.
Right.
Because the ante would have gone up. I know how this works. And,
well, as a scientist, just real quick, and then I'm going to go to calls because every line is full.
Stuff like that.
If I could ask you as a scientist, then, I mean, you would think that parenting throughout the years, your child might, at 5 years old, the boy wants to dress as a girl, the girl wants to dress as a boy, whatever, that you would just let those things run their course and it would all work out in the end. And then nowadays, though, they'll put children on hormone treatments, or they do that kind of thing. And I mean, it strikes me that kind of maniacal, oh, we've got a new thing and we're going to treat it, is really child abuse.
Yeah. It is. And see, that extreme. And maybe parents who freak out because they're, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Am I there?
You're good now. We lost you for a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. So we have this extreme, God's holding everything in existence, don't worry. We have this extreme where we have the Catholic parents doing the things that we think we're supposed to be doing according to a lot of the literature that's out there. And the other extreme is we have the secular response that says, oh, yay, you want to have a sex change, let's do it for you. The best advice falls somewhere in the middle where, the not freaking out part. And I found some very useful books for dealing with teenage girls' stress and anxiety among secular sources, but you have to comb through them. You can't just read those books and take every bit of advice that's in there, because it's that confidence thing, like with the faith and science thing. You have to know your faith as a parent and be able to sift through what is good advice and what is advice you shouldn't take. What's error? What's truth? What's error? And so I've always said, in the faith and science realm, you don't get a shortcut being Catholic. You have to do your homework about every issue. You have to know what the church teaches. You have to know what society is saying, and you have to be able to meet the person in front of you where that person is. Child, adult, anybody.
Dr. Stacy Trasenkos, our guest. Time to go to the phones. Nick in Detroit, Michigan, watching on YouTube Live. You are up first today. Your question for Dr. Trasenkos.
How you guys doing? All right, so one teaching, which I'm a Catholic and I love all the teachings and I love having the answers, and not only because I have them, but because I believe them. But one that stumps me is the missing church on Sunday is a mortal sin. How do I explain that in a rational way, or one that makes sense?
Joe,
Yep.
yeah. So, yeah, I had this exact conversation just like a week ago in the car trips, driving around with my kids, because one of my kids was wondering, if I get to college, what am I supposed to do? Like, she wanted to know, just like you're asking, I want to do the right thing. Where is the line? And we had a long conversation about practicing prudence, about being honest with yourself. That if you had a reason, like if you're driving to church and you're intending to go to Mass, and you're intending to go to Mass, and something happens and your car breaks down, and you're trying your hardest to get there, you have an excuse for not being there. But if you wake up and you slept late and you say, oh, I think I'm out of gas, I'm not even going to try to go, you're not being honest with yourself. You're not really trying. And so you have to honestly try. And we have done that all our lives with our kids anyway, because my husband was always very big on this, going as a family. And my 15-year-old's never missed a Mass on an day of obligation, except for once when she was in the hospital. But she wanted to know then, why are people only at church on Easter and Christmas? And how come they still call themselves Catholic? And so we had a long conversation about the obligation is, if you love Christ, you're supposed to be with Christ. You're supposed to go to Mass and practice your faith and be there every Sunday and holy day of obligation. There's a very minimum that you are supposed to go once a year, but that's not really trying if that's all you do. You're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. You're not really trying to be Catholic. So you need to take the obligation seriously and make every effort honestly in your heart and in your deeds to be there.
Well, you know what? Because there are so many calls, I'm going to leave it right there. Nick, thank you very, very much for that call. Our guest is Dr. Stacy Trasancos. We're talking about challenges in evangelization, and we're mostly talking about how those affect the young people in our lives, in our families, in our communities. Dan in Steubenville, Ohio. I've heard of Steubenville before. Dan, your question for Dr. Trasancos.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for taking my call. So, I'm wondering if perhaps, like in our culture, if you see this typically, there's a de-emphasis placed on the personhood of Christ, and so I think a lot of times, some of the things we talk about, like truth and abstract or philosophical concepts, are not necessarily as attractive, I think, as the personhood of Jesus Christ. And I think any true evangelization, it stems from that. It comes from that. And I think of, John Paul II, who was just wonderful with the youth. And he said, when the youth come to see the Pope, they come to see Jesus Christ. And I think that's our starting point. And I think in our culture, in our mainstream media, and a lot of our approaches to evangelizing the youth and to give them answers, we're oftentimes overlooking the one true answer, our Lord, the way, the truth, and the life. And I'm wondering if you tend to find that as well, a lot of times, kind of in our mainstream, in our culture.
Yes, I do. There was one time, I keep relying on my experiences, but this is very personal for me. There was one time my daughter was struggling with anxiety, and it was getting overwhelming. She didn't know what to do with it, and she was having a meltdown. And, she said, Mom, stop saying, just pray about it. Stop saying, Christ is here with you to help you. She got frustrated as she was screaming, Jesus is not right here in front of me. I can't see him. I need him to sit here next to me and tell me what to do and help me. I need him here. And so that's what you're saying, Dan. She needed the person of Jesus Christ. And one of the most moving retreats that a couple of my kids ever went to was one where the speaker was just focusing on that. He was focusing on the love of Christ and how much Christ loved them, and how much, it was almost reminded me of my days growing up Baptist with the evangelical approach to it. But it was beautiful, and they never forgot it. And I agree with you totally, Dan. And I don't know exactly how we do that except to just keep talking about it. And so thank you for bringing that up.
Dan, your response.
with my own kids is I think, like, when I teach them, like, on Sunday, like, I'll pull out the Baltimore Catechism. I mean, there's so many sources to go to, and that's really rich. I mean, it's like a summa within the summa. We've got 2,000 years of teaching. We talk about theology, and any theology or any philosophy that isn't centered on Christ, I think it can be just a diversion in a sense. And I think going back to the fullness of truth, we talk about the fullness of truth, we're referring to not just something, but a person, and that's our Lord. So I really I appreciate this discussion, and I think it's great. So that's a good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, in Steubenville, Ohio, one of my top 10 favorite Ohio cities. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more. Dr. Stacy Trasancos. Our topic: challenges to evangelization. If you've got some and you'd like to share them, give us a call, 888-318-7884.
We're here for you. Give us a call today on Catholic Answers Live.
Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Turns out that today, as back then, this question has a lot of different answers. So many groups want to appropriate Jesus, tweaking his identity until he looks and sounds just like one of them. But then you no longer have the Lord, says apologist Trent Horn. You have an imposter. In his new groundbreaking book, Counterfeit Christ, Trent exposes 18 phony versions of Jesus that we encounter today, helping you to recognize the fakes when you see them, explain why they're phony, and make a case for the full truth and beauty of who Jesus is, the Christ, the Son of the living God. Order your copy of Counterfeit Christ today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Looking for an on-fire Catholic speaker for your event? Catholic Answers speakers will inform and inspire your audience to grow in their Catholic faith. For more information on booking a Catholic Answers speaker, visit CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com today.
Hi, this is Trent Horn, and you've probably heard me explain Catholicism to non-Catholic callers on the radio or engage opponents in formal public debates. I've always hoped these interactions would show people how to graciously defend and share our faith. But they're not enough. That's why I've created a weekly podcast that will help Catholics answer the toughest objections against our faith. Every episode of the Council of Trent will provide listeners with a conversation roadmap that will help them share their faith with anyone. Keep in mind that I hate boring lectures. These podcasts will contain entertaining, informative, and practical explanations of the faith, as well as interviews with the best Catholic writers and speakers in the world today. Visit TrentHornPodcast.com today to find out how you can subscribe to my new podcast. That's TrentHornPodcast.com.
Welcome back to this Friday edition of Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Next hour, Rod Bennett will be here with us. This hour, we have our good friend, Dr. Stacy Trasancos, theologian and scientist. We're talking about challenges to evangelization. Lots of calls, Stacy. Shall we go back to the phones?
Sure.
All right, let's go to Walt in Melbourne, Pennsylvania, listening on the TuneIn app. Walt, do we have you there?
You do. It's Malvern, but anyway.
Oh.
That's okay. So the question I had was, you were saying earlier that you don't. It's a good thing that recognizing that you don't tell people that they're sick, and well, that's what you seem to say, that you don't tell people that they're sinners and that they will come to church. And what's the purpose of them going to church? That's the first question. And then I wanted to give you an anecdotal story. My daughter is attending public school. She has some learning disabilities, and it's a brave new world out there.
Yeah.
There was a young lady who was getting hit on by other girls, saying, "Well, we know you're gay. We know you're gay." And the girl started to believe that maybe she was quote unquote gay. And I said, "Well, Sarah, the problem is everybody in this culture, everything's so sexualized. And girls tend to want to have intimate relationships, and it's so sexualized now that they think that they're homosexual." And I told her about the Four Loves, and then we found online C.S. Lewis giving a talk about the Four Loves. And we sent it to this young lady. The following day, she said to my daughter, "Sarah, you're right, I'm not gay."
Oh, what a great story. Well, C.S. Lewis, he helps a lot of us. But Dr. Jasankos, what do you make of Walt's point that we can't just not confront people with sin?
Yeah, that's the thing that's so hard. Because I almost said the same thing too when my daughter said that. I said, what do you mean? Like you can't. If you go to the hospital, at some point the doctor has to say to you, this thing is broken and we need to fix it. And so you do have to talk about that. And she said, no, I mean for getting people getting there. If the church would say, now this is, I know we do say this, but I just don't think it's getting communicated. She said, if the church would say, hey, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you've done in the past, no matter who you are, anyone, you are all welcome to come here. We accept you. We love you. We're all sinners. We're all in this together. You can come here. And I was kind of saying we do say that, but I don't know. Maybe it's not getting communicated, and because when you get there, you do need to go to confession and you do need to face your sins, and that can be hard. But maybe the first step is just getting people to feel comfortable coming to Mass.
It's interesting too, because while you were talking, I was thinking about the earliest church, in the Roman Empire, and they had a reputation for taking care of people who were sick, taking care of people who had been abandoned by other people, and that kind of thing. So I wonder if we're doing enough of that. It's not just. Yeah. I mean, being Catholic is centered around going to Mass, but if that's all it is, then that is not a very welcoming community.
Right. It is getting out. I don't remember. Did Pope Francis say it, that we have to get out there and smell like the sheep? The priests have to smell like the sheep, or right. Something like that. But we do have to do more of that, and I guess we do have to do more of that. Oops, my computer.
That's all right. I think we get the point. And Pope Francis has those always has those colorful metaphors for us. But we just, in other words, I do think, and it's not just Pope Francis, all the recent popes, get out into the world, get out there, and because the Mass is a very special place. It is a very special thing that's happening there. And not everybody's ready for that all the time. There have to be other things that happen before the full invitation to participate in the Mass can go out to people. There has to be a welcome that people feel before that happens.
Yeah, and that's, I have been learning as a parent too, because as a scientist, I was pretty hardcore metallic, not very happy and comfortable with the feels, and I've had to actually go through training myself, like self-development, to learn how to talk about feelings and emotions. Because one thing I'm learning, I'm in my 50th year now. One thing I'm learning is that it really matters what people feel. It's not enough to say, I understand you. The person needs to feel understood. And how do you get a person to feel understood? I mean, there's all kinds of advice in the secular world about, repeating back what a person said. Do I understand you correctly? There's something called the eyebrow flash, where you do this so people know that you're listening. You raise your eyebrows. But that point that people need to feel understood. Yeah. It's not enough to say, I understand you. You have to make sure the person feels understood, and then they feel recognized. The person feels recognized. And then I think that is how we meet people where they are. Do you feel understood? What can I do? How can I do to show you that I understand?
Walt, I will say thank you very much for that call. I'm going to keep moving because there's a lot of people who want to talk about this topic. We're talking about challenges to evangelization. I go now to Jennifer in New Hampshire. Are you there with us, Jennifer?
I am.
And you're go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I'm calling from New Hampshire here. It's It's my first time ever calling. I'm sorry. We have 3 boys, and all 3 of them are in Catholic school. And we do that side-to-side driving and having those talks every day, like you were talking about. And I think that's really important. But I think one of the biggest, most important parts is your Catholic marriage. Living out a sacramental Catholic marriage.
Oh, the call dropped. I apologize. Stacy, do we have you there with us? We got a problem.
Hello?
Yeah, Jennifer was making the point, and then the call dropped with Jennifer. I don't know what happened. I apologize, Jennifer. But I'm going to go with the point, Jennifer, and you can call back and follow up if you want. I feel terrible that we just dropped you. But the point she was making is that Christian marriage, that a fully alive Catholic marriage, is one of the things that kids need. They need to see this role model or this model of how to live their life.
Yeah, and that's another big topic that that doesn't necessarily relate directly to teens, but like Jennifer said, indirectly, is how do we help people in marriages? I mean, I have, my husband and I celebrated the sacrament of matrimony. We're committed, but it's hard. It is one of the hardest relationships I've ever had, being that close and that vulnerable with another human being. And I do think that's another ripe area for evangelization, is how do we do more than say, hey, don't get divorced. Divorce is wrong. Just suffer. Just pray. Just stay in your marriage. There have to be tools for how to help people connect at such a personal level. This analogy makes sense to me because I studied atoms. But when 2 atoms bond, the electrons around the nuclei orbit both nuclei. So they're sharing their electrons. And only some atoms will bond with other atoms. There are very strict rules in the laws of nature about which atoms bond with others. But when they do make a bond, everything changes. The bond itself becomes something new, a new molecular orbital, where there once were atomic orbitals. I used to actually approach my relationships with people this way. Don't take it personally, but we're not supposed to be in the same sphere. Go away from me. And then with my husband, it was like, let's just overlap our orbitals and let our electrons go around both of us, and we'll be married. And marriage is so much more than that. There are not rules for marriage. Each marriage is unique. And with my husband and myself, it's been years of practice and very hard work, born of love, to learn to listen to each other, to learn to understand each other, to learn to chill out when things aren't going so great, to learn sometimes to even put the beautiful, pristine, unbroken sacrament of marriage up on the shelf so that down here in this valley of tears, he and I can do the very hard work on ourselves to fix our own wounds so that we can have a more solid marriage. And it's so hard. It's so rewarding, too. It's rewarding for the simple reason that we, as hard as things can get, we can look at each other and break out laughing over something that happened that reminds us of something 10 years ago with our children. And I wouldn't take for that. But I'm really only, as I get older, I'm starting to understand what it means to be married. And kids absolutely need that. I'd love to be able to tell my 5 youngest children, my 2 oldest were before I converted, and they didn't have an intact home. But my 5 youngest children, I love to be able to say to them, the friend you're talking about that lives with mom and doesn't know where dad is or never sees dad or has a stepdad, I'm like, you have to do a lot of work to understand that friend's position, because you've never known what it's like not to have mom and dad in the home. As bad as things got, you never had to worry about that. But so many of the kids out there do have to worry about that. And there's something very, very fundamental lost. It's not just a loss of parents. It's some kind of loss of love.
Right. The trauma of that is tremendous, and it's all across our entire culture. And we really can't anymore say, well, we didn't know, because we've got generations of kids now have grown up in this and have told the story of, my parents didn't mean to do anything bad, but their divorce, shattered me. And so I do take, and I think you do as well, Jennifer's point that our Christian marriage, hard as it is part of like living it faithfully and living it as Christians towards one another is part of our, and maybe the most important part, I don't know, of our witness to our children so that they have a chance at having the faith.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my oldest daughter's 30, and and she grew up when I was a single mother, broken home, and it's heartbreaking, but I know what it can do to children. And she's had trouble learning to develop relationships herself. But she's 30 years old, and she and I, got to that point as mother and daughter where we can finally look back on our lives and talk about things. And she said, Mom, the number one thing a kid needs from any parent is love. I just need to know you love me no matter what. And I'm like, yeah, there were times I was so worried about doing this right, doing that right, getting, checking boxes, feeling like the house was burning and I couldn't just sit on the porch and talk to you because the house is burning down. I think Satan was trying to tell me the house was burning down because what you really needed was me to sit with you and just be there, and not be freaking out. And, we're good now. Thank God. Thank the church for the guidance.
I'd love to hear you talking about that, Stacy, because I do think we often, when we get into churchy type contexts, we don't tell the truth about what our life was like, and that there's no perfect people here. I mean, there's Dr. Ray, but other than that, there's no perfect people on the EWTN network. I do think that I admire you for just speaking frankly about those kinds of things because, as you said, this is the real world, and we can't keep the faith over here like it doesn't fit with this real world of all kinds of stuff happens. Jennifer, who I dropped before, is back. Jennifer, you gave us a great occasion for a conversation. I'm sorry we dropped you.
I don't know what happened, but I just wanted to stress, that even more about. I think sometimes we speak and we say a lot of things that kids don't understand. That but they see love in their home between their mom and their dad who made them, and when they see that, they see God's love, and you don't have to speak too much more. You do. You have to say all sorts of things, but they are always watching for you to mess up to prove that they don't have to kind of follow where you're going because you're the parents. But if you just have that constant love in your home with each other, I think that right there says so much about marriage between a man and a woman, about your faith, about the sacrament, about what our church upholds,
Amen, Jennifer. I'm glad that we did get you back on the line. We have to go to a break now. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is our guest. We'll be right back with more on the challenges to evangelization these days. 888-31-TRUTH, the number, right back after this.
Catholic Answers Live.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest, Dr. Stacy Trasancos, who wowed us all last year at the Catholic Answers Conference by she explained two things to us, God and photosynthesis. I didn't understand either of them, but that was a pretty good presentation. Did you have fun at the conference, by the way? Did you have a good time?
Oh, I had a blast, and the whole Catholic Answers team just treats you like royalty, so it was fun.
Most people don't. We don't. We actually thought that you were royalty, and afterwards we found out you weren't, and we were like, well, "Oh man, we made such a big deal about her."
All right.
Let us. We're talking about challenges to evangelization today with Dr. Trasenkos. We go now to Daniel in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Daniel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, your point for Dr. Trasenkos.
Oh, wow, I'm on. Well, Doc, I don't know if you're psychology or psychiatrist. I don't know what you are.
Chemist.
But, pardon me?
She's a chemist.
Chemist. Ah, okay. You mentioned your daughter had lesbian tendencies, and due to the culture and the information age and everything thrown at them through the computer screen, television, their earbuds, and whatever, they're getting a lot of the worldly culture, which is definitely doesn't say our Lord Jesus Christ very much. But I did not hear you say anything from the Bible. Wouldn't it be okay to be austere, to give the child something to hang on to?
Oh, a little
like
something from the
Spirit
Bible
of
for the kids. Yeah. You're against the Bible, aren't you? You don't believe in the Bible. Dr. No, I'm just teasing. Sorry.
We don't read it as Catholics.
So, yeah, right. Sorry, we're Catholics. No, okay. So,
No.
the place of the Bible in helping a child to understand their place in the world.
Right. Yeah, and first of all, she does not. My daughter does not have homosexual tendencies. They all think they have to question. Is my point.
Yes.
Like a lot of them question for a week, and they all seem to think they have to do that. I just like when the topic came up in our home, we didn't freak out, and a lot of kids go through that these days. But yeah, there's you know, you got to be careful. I'll move on to the Bible, but we are very Bible based. But you got to be careful talking about the Bible with kids too, because I absolutely think you need to, but you need to be ready, because kids will do what so many other people do, is cherry pick quotes and ask the hard questions. And, you know, why was God so mean and killed all those people in the Old Testament and stuff like that. You have to know your stuff. I mean, that's why Catholic Answers is so valuable. You can go and look up those things. But we do turn to the Bible, and I think even more turn to Christ the person, like Dan was saying. Relate it all back to Christ the person. And you have to also relate it to how to live your life. You know, why are these things important? Why, you know, I say the donut analogy a lot. You know, it would be fun to go eat a dozen donuts, or maybe you think you were born to eat a dozen donuts in 1 hour. And it might be fun while you're doing it, but we all know it wouldn't be fun an hour later, and that if you lived your life that way, it certainly wouldn't be fun. And so we practice virtue, and we try to be like Christ, and we try to be united in communion with the church, because that's how to be happy. It's how to live a better life.
That's striking that you're that. First of all, I don't like it when you talk down donuts. I never like it when anybody talks down donuts. But what you're saying is that at least what I heard, and you can help me out here, part of this is not just the Bible says this or the even the church says that, but that there's a key here to your happiness, and that you need to find out what that key is.
Exactly. And I think that right there is the biggest challenge in evangelization right now, or for any time. I mean, Bishop Strickland is very clear on this. The truths of the Catholic Church are there. He points to the shining hill. They're there. They're eternal. And that doesn't mean we can say the truths are there and they're eternal, and now we can just walk away and go to Walmart or go buy donuts. It means we have to, that's what evangelization is preaching the gospel in every age, in every time, in every space, in every location, with every person in front of you. We have to figure out how to bring those truths to that person. That is the work of evangelization, and it requires that we get to know the person in front of us. And you can't do that by reading a book, or, you know, you have to be in communion with that person. You have
Yeah.
to listen and talk and receive and give. And I mean, it's Trinitarian.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks very much. Let's go to Tom in Columbus, Ohio, listening on St. Gabriel Radio. Tom, your question for Dr. Trasenkos.
Hi, hi, Doctor.
Hi, Tom.
Doctor, the first thing I want to say is every time I've heard you on Catholic Answers, I've been astounded by your wisdom. So
thank you.
I hope we can hear you more and more. My question I have, Doctor, is you used twice about you used the word person twice, and you mentioned about your daughter was telling you that Christ wasn't sitting here. I think you mentioned that Christ, the person, is here. I think you just mentioned the person of Christ. From a from a dogmatic theology standpoint, how is person defined?
Oh, I love that question. That was one of the things, as someone who totally lives scientism, the life of science has all the answers, this is one of the teachings of the church that rocked my world. The church defines, and St. Thomas Aquinas defines it in part 1 of the Summa, question 29, I think it is, where he's talking about the divine persons. A person, according to Boethius, a 6th century philosopher, so 6th century, Aquinas quotes him in the 13th century, an individual substance of a rational nature. And so what it means is we are individuals and we have a rational nature, and we understand that from the Holy Trinity. That was a divine revelation. It's something God told us. You are made in the image and likeness of God. You have a body. You are a soul. You are a body and a soul. Your soul has the spiritual powers of intellect, God the Father generating the second person of the Holy Trinity, the Word, the Son. You have intellect. You have free will, which we get from the Father and the Son together as one substance, spirating the Holy Spirit in love, willing to love. So there's thinking and willing. We are made to think and will. We are not just collections of atoms bumbling around doing our thing. We are responsible for our choices. And that's why we practice virtue. And realizing that changed my life. And realizing that it's not just that Stacy Trasenkos is all alone out here thinking and willing. It's not enough to just be me. I have to be me in communion with other people, which was very hard for me because, frankly, I'd just be okay with just being me and left alone. But we have to be in communion with other people. That's why people go out to dinner, because you're communing. It's a very Catholic thing. And we have to be in a relationship with the other person, and the relationship becomes a thing unto itself. And that's what it means to be a person. It means that's the work in our life, is to forge our relationships, work on ourselves, and right there in that point that you made is, again, where evangelization has to happen.
Tom?
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for your very kind words.
Thank you.
We don't need more people puffing up Stacy Trasenkos, though. That's the last thing we need around here. So help us, Stacy, as we're kind of winding down here on this hour.
Yeah.
It's striking to me that this problem is everywhere. There's nowhere you can go that it's not there, that young people are losing the faith or missing the faith, or somehow it's not getting communicated to them. If you can kind of sum it up for us, what do we got to do?
Well, like I said, I mean, I take being a Catholic mother very seriously. I am very clear that my role is to lead my children to heaven and to lead my husband to heaven. Every day I go to bed and I say it doesn't matter what else I did today, the number one goal of every day is, did I lead them to heaven? Did I do what I needed to do to lead them closer today? And that's kind of how I check myself at night. And I think that it means a radical, just like I say in the Faith and Science Dialogue when I'm talking about evolution, what we need today is a radical confidence in the teachings of the Catholic Church ourselves. We have to be so willing to examine our own sins, examine our own faults, fix them, go to confession, that we can muddle out there among the people who need Christ brought to them and do it without worrying that we're watering down the truth.
Wow.
We have to be able to go out there and reach them.
Thank you, Dr. Stacy Trasancos. It is always a pleasure. Be confident in the faith.
Catholic Answers Live.
Sharing the gospel with family and friends can be challenging. It's especially hard when they won't even hear you out because of all the mental roadblocks they've built up. This is Carlo Broussard, and in my new book, Prepare the Way, my aim is to help you tackle that essential first step to apologetics and evangelization, getting people to listen with an open mind. Even our best witness can bounce right off folks like these if we don't prepare the way first, breaking down barriers and leaving minds and souls free to encounter the truth. I'll give you evidence and arguments and step-by-step strategies based on asking the right questions to help them overcome their obstacles and make a straight path for the Lord. Order your copy of Prepare the Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Interested in visiting Catholic Answers? If you live in or plan to visit beautiful Southern California, we'd love to have you come by for a tour. You can meet our apologists and staff, visit our chapel, and watch the broadcast of Catholic Answers Live. To arrange a tour, call us at 619-387-7200 or email us at visit@catholic.com.
Hi, this is Trent Horn, and you've probably heard me explain Catholicism to non-Catholic callers on the radio or engage opponents in formal public debates. I've always hoped these interactions would show people how to graciously defend and share our faith. But they're not enough. That's why I've created a weekly podcast that will help Catholics answer the toughest objections against our faith. Every episode of the Council of Trent will provide listeners with a conversation roadmap that will help them share their faith with anyone. Keep in mind that I hate boring lectures. These podcasts will contain entertaining, informative, and practical explanations of the faith, as well as interviews with the best Catholic writers and speakers in the world today. Visit TrentHornPodcast.com today to find out how you can subscribe to my new podcast. That's TrentHornPodcast.com. Hi, this is Trent Horn. Are you looking for a dynamic Catholic speaker to present at your next conference or parish event? Well, we've got a whole host of speakers who are eager to share the truth of the Catholic faith in your community. Go to CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com to get all the information you need to make your event the talk of the town. That's CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com.
With the recent commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the release of Humani Vitae, there have been fresh attacks on Catholic teaching from outside and unfortunately inside the Church. That's why Catholic Answers thought it critical to provide a vigorous affirmation of Pope Paul VI's prophetic wisdom with our newest book, Inseparable: 5 Perspectives on Sex, Life, and Love in Defense of Humani Vitae. We asked 5 distinguished contributors to reflect on and defend Humani Vitae from 5 perspectives, each of them compelling, together forming a mosaic of truth. Don't be caught uninformed when the topic comes up among friends, family, and coworkers. Order your copy of Inseparable today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or by visiting the shop at Catholic.com.
As Catholics, we hear expressions like dogma, doctrine, deposit of faith, and of course, magisterium. And adding to the confusion, we have the ordinary magisterium and the extraordinary magisterium. So what if you were looking for one book written for the layman that explained what all these terms mean and how they interact in the lives of the Church and her faithful? The fact is, no such book existed until now. Brand new from Catholic Answers Press is Jimmy Akin's latest book, Teaching with Authority. Teaching with Authority is not about specific church teachings, it's about church teaching itself. A unique and long overdue resource for Catholics as well as those inquiring about the faith, Teaching with Authority will help deepen your understanding of what the Church teaches by showing you how, why, and where she does. Get your copy of Teaching with Authority today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging onto the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Well, back to Catholic Answers Live, Friday edition. I am a little bit of a microphone problem. We're all right, though. I am Cy Kelly Heroes. It's a wild Friday here. I don't know why it's such a wild Friday. Did you start partying early, Nick? I don't know what happened. Well, welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, second hour. And I'll tell you what. I don't know what happened to the Catholic Church. Why did the simple, pure Christianity of the early Christians give way to all this Catholic stuff? That's the question, actually, that many people ask in a quite serious way. I hope you know that I am not asking it in a quite serious way, because I am indeed a Catholic, and this is Catholic Answers Live. But did it happen? Was there ever an apostasy within the church? Was there ever a period, a time where there was a loss of faith or a loss of fidelity, I suppose would be the way to say it, to the faith? That is what we discuss this hour, and you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Our guest to help us discuss that is the author of the book, The Apostasy That Wasn't, The Extraordinary Story of the Unbreakable Early Church. That's for Catholic Answers Press. Rod Bennett's book, Four Witnesses, The Early Church in Our Own Words, is widely recognized as a modern classic of Catholic apologetics. He's got other books as well, including Bad Shepherds, 5 Eras When the Laity Thrived While the Clergy Did the Devil's Work. Rod Bennett, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to spending a little time with you this evening.
So what's the problem with this idea that there was a time where there was a pristine, simple Christianity and the Catholic Church was unfaithful to it or did not maintain it?
You mean other than the fact that it's not true?
Okay, fair. All right, show's over. See ya. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Yeah, other than that.
Well, the main trouble with it is that, well, it's interesting if you step back from it. Every form of Christianity other than Catholicism teaches some version of the Great Apostasy. We have a singular role in the Christian history, and that is really the only church that still says, nope, we're under the same management. We've had our ups and downs, but the faith has never been lost. Christ promised that he'd be with us till the end of time, and he has been. Everything is cooking along, theologically speaking, just as it should. And there's never been any great falling away, and no new prophet needed to come along to set things right. And everything continues as was done in the original plan. And that's pretty striking when you think about it. Literally, just about literally, maybe if there's an exception, I haven't heard it. But just about every other system recognizes that the Catholic Church was large and in charge for 1,000 years, and they have to account for this fact somehow. If your teaching is not Catholic, is different from what the Catholic Church teaches, you won't confess that your teaching is different than the New Testament. So you've got to account for the fact that that the Catholic Church teaches something different, and so therefore you're driven to some sort of great falling away, some sort of enormous catastrophe where the Holy Spirit was driven away for centuries, and you're forced to come up with a scenario, really a conspiracy theory, and that I think is the chief problem with the idea, is that it is a conspiracy theory. It has all of the qualities of the Flat Earth Society or the Apollo deniers or whatever. There's simply no historical evidence for it. What there is a driving emotional need on some folks' part to believe that it's true, and a massive misreading of the evidence based on a jaundiced outlook going in. And so that, in a nutshell, is the reason. It's a non-historical myth along the lines of the Apollo moon landing deniers.
Rod Bennett is our guest. We're talking about the Great Apostasy, which Rod has called The Apostasy That Wasn't in his book of that title, The Apostasy That Wasn't, The Extraordinary Story of the Unbreakable Early Church. 888-318-7884 is our number. If you are of a contrary view, if you think in some way the Catholic Church, as it is currently constituted, or as it was constituted in its early years, was somehow unfaithful or unwilling in its transmission of the true Christian faith, give us a call, 888-318-7884. Or maybe you're a person who would just like some help defending the church. You hear this from family members or from friends about how the Catholic Church abandoned the original pristine Christianity and has fallen away in one way or another. We're happy to offer that help, 888-318-7884. Rod, is the current kind of I don't know if it's a fad. Maybe I don't want to use a dismissive word, but the current tendency, I guess, to say, well, I want to follow Jesus, but it doesn't make me religious. I'm a Jesus follower. I don't believe in religion. So is this a kind of subtle form of that somehow these people who made a religion out of the whole thing, they're just not faithful to the real Jesus?
Well, it is very much akin to that. Someone who's very near and dear to me confessed one day to the idea that she was inclined to follow what they call red letter Christianity these days. I don't know if you've heard of this red letter movement, but apparently, many Bibles have been printed with the words of Christ in red. And so recently there arose this movement, I suppose. I think movement's probably fad is probably the right word in this case.
Okay.
For identifying yourself as a red letter Christian. That is, I still like and am interested in the personality of Jesus Christ. I think he was a wise teacher, a great moral reformer, et cetera, et cetera. I'm inclined to believe that Jesus is trustworthy, and I do care what he says. But I'm not really interested in a lot of human opinion about him. I'm more of a red letter Christian. I want to stick with the words in red. Well, the answer to that, logically speaking, you have to be a little careful because most of these folks are talking emotionally, not logically. But logically speaking, the answer is, well, there were no tape recorders around at the time of Christ's ministry.
Right.
And the same men who wrote down what Jesus said also wrote the other parts of the Gospels. So if they would lie to you about the other parts, they would lie to you about the red parts too. So logically, there's not a whole lot to stand on there. But it does represent, I think, in some ways, kind of a touching response to the fact that we do live in a society where people have been spun so many different ways.
Yeah.
And there are so many competing interpreters on the market who are offering you their compelling account of it all, that people do think, I want to go back to the sources. I want a faith untouched by human hands, so to speak. And I think we do have to be sympathetic to that. I can second the emotion, I guess. So long as it's just an emotion, and again, so long as it's a feeling and not a thought. Because if it becomes a thought, then, you have to point out the fact that nobody knows what Jesus said apart from the witnesses who were there. And the witnesses who were there, historically speaking, have an account of what Jesus instructed them to do, and then there's an account historically of what they did. They founded the Christian Church, which we identify as the Catholic Church, the original church founded by the apostles. So, again, I think it definitely is that instinct, that emotion is a reflection of the idea that human beings are not trustworthy, and that if it was up to human input or human custodianship to keep the faith sound, then I don't have a whole lot of faith that the faith has been kept sound. And again, we can second that emotion. Even in the Catholic faith, we don't claim that it was done without supernatural intervention. In fact, we insist that it was, but not untouched by human hands.
888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. When you talk to, say, Protestant interlocutors, people maybe who are in the tradition of a Calvin or Luther, and you talk to them about people like Clement of Alexandria or Polycarp, people who in the ancient world it was claimed, and in Clement's case almost certainly, were associates of the apostles, and who make clear that the early church didn't apostatize. It stayed faithful to exactly what the apostles said to do, and that all this sacramental stuff is not an added-on thing later. What do you find is the response, if you say something like that? Maybe I mischaracterized your thinking, but if you say something like that, what do you find is the response from those who are followers of say, Luther?
Well, I usually find that they're not very familiar with the early fathers. There are exceptions, but
Okay.
I usually find that they're not very familiar with it. And I would suggest that really the best way to combat apostasy theory is to learn more about the ante-Nicene church. A lot of people blame Constantine for having made this great change, this great apostasy.
Oh, right.
And that is what my book is about. And my book is an examination of the era of Constantine and his immediate successors, the period where so many want to put they want to pinpoint the apostasy as happening during that era when the Emperor Constantine legalized the faith and
Right.
made it so important in the Roman Empire. The best way to examine that, though, is to look at in other words, if the theory is that Constantine changed everything, well, it's really important to know what things were like before Constantine.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
Many of us, like myself, I mean, I'm a convert, so I was, I believe some version of this myself. But many of us believe that you couldn't really know much about Christianity before Constantine.
Oh.
Whereas in reality, there are many, many thousands of pages of documentation about the early church for the first 300 years. There's an embarrassment of riches, as a matter of fact. But sometimes I like to narrow it down to just one man. One of the things that inspired me to write the book is I discovered that St. Anthony the Great, Anthony of Egypt, one of the early monastics, his life just happens to straddle this era perfectly.
Okay.
He was born about 25, I think, around 25 years before Constantine. And he lived to be 105, I think, years old. So that he lived not only to see Constantine's whole life and the entire change that happened, but he also lived to see Constantine's son, that son's successor, Julian the Apostate, and he got to see Anthony had a bird's eye view of the entire era. He grew up an active, knowledgeable Christian before Constantine came to power. He lived through the Constantinian era, and then he lived for many years afterward. So he's got a perfect bird's eye view of
Right.
what changed and what didn't. And he gives us an account. And, of course, Athanasius, who was his pupil, who was his disciple, Athanasius wrote a biography of Anthony. And so we have a very full account of what Anthony and his disciples believed before, during, and after the Constantinian era. So what that illumines the fact that the more you know about Christianity before Constantine, the fewer foolish statements you'll make about what changed. For example, in Dan Brown's book, the Da Vinci Code, he pictures Constantine as terrorizing the council members into divinizing Christ, who before that time Christians were open to the idea that Christ was just a wise man, etc. And that so Constantine imposed this idea on the council, and that the Council of Nicaea is responsible for the divinity of Christ. In reality, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of praise of Christ as the eternal Son of God for decades before this. And the only way you could say something as foolish as that is to not be familiar with that material. And I'm afraid many people, even fairly literate people, are not familiar with it because it's not a common thing to stumble over in our society, the many, many pages of writings from the early fathers.
Rod Bennett is our guest. We're talking about the idea that the early church fell into apostasy and that there is maybe a purer church out there that we can recover. Among his books, one for Catholic Answers Press, is The Apostasy That Wasn't, the extraordinary story of the unbreakable early church. One thing I didn't mention about Rod Bennett is that he will be one of the featured speakers at our conference coming up September 26th through 29th right here in beautiful and sunny San Diego at the Hyatt Regency La Jolla. And here to tell us a little bit more about that and to invite you to come is the director and czar of events here at Catholic Answers, Eric Olson. Hi, Erica.
Hi. You always give me a promotion when I'm on.
I gave you 2 jobs.
I know.
I gave you 2 titles, director and
this
czar.
Is great.
I know.
I need a raise with that.
Well, see, the titles come from me, but the raises come from Chris Check. So good luck to you.
I'm already fascinated just listening.
I know.
Rod, I've never actually met you. I've only corresponded with you through email, and I'm
happy to talk to you. In fact, I'm really looking forward to getting to meet all the Catholic Answers crew. I have been to San Diego, but it's been many years ago.
It's going to be
30
great.
years ago since my last visit. So I'm really looking forward to coming and getting to meet the gang.
I'm so just listening to you right now in the last 5 minutes, sitting here in studio quietly, listening to you go on about our church history and the different documents that.
How are you doing with the hillbilly accent?
I'm fascinated. That's what I was going to say.
She doesn't have a hillbilly accent.
I want to hear you. I want to hear your talk even more because I
know that makes it better.
I just found out you have an accent.
What accent? Everybody around here thinks I've got no accent at all.
Oh no, you'll be so popular here. We love accents in San Diego.
So what are you actually going to be talking about at the conference, Rod?
Well, I've been asked to talk about a related subject similar to what we're talking about here, and that is, I don't know that I have a title yet, but it's stepping back out of the scriptural tit for tat, which is so often what these things descend to, and looking at the big picture, just simply looking at the questions about which church is the authentic Christian church, looking at them from a purely historical or purely, I sometimes describe it as what would a spaceman, if a spaceman from a UFO came down to Earth and got interested in the subject of which Christianity was the authentic Christianity, what sort of things would he look at? And so it kind of helps us, I think, to get our heads up out of the weeds and look at the big picture. Like one example, and I don't want to steal my own thunder for the speech this September, but one example is that to this day, 17/20ths of all Christians on earth believe basically the Catholic faith.
Right.
In other words, I'm including in the 17/20ths the Eastern Orthodox and the traditional Anglicans, other people who differ with us mainly on issues of polity, governance.
Right.
But other than that, we believe the same faith. 17/20ths. Now, if 17/20ths still hold essentially the Catholic faith, and that all the people who dispute it make up just that very small 3/20ths, then that's a piece of evidence. In other words, Christian unity is sometimes talked about as if it were the search for the mythical unicorn and stuff, but it's amazing the degree to which Christian unity still exists. And so that's an example of the sort of thing I want to talk about, the big picture things that you don't even have to tussle over theology. You just look at some facts.
All right, I'm getting the signal. I got to go to a break. I got to let people know, if you want to come to the conference, no, not if you want to, you do want to come to the conference.
Yes,
if you got that weekend free
there.
and you can make it, go to CatholicAnswersConference.com. CatholicAnswersConference.com. You'll find out everything you need to know to make it to what I think is going to be the best Catholic Answers Conference yet.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Catholic Answers Live is brought to you in part by CatholicSingles.com, the website for Catholics who want to meet others who share their Catholic values for faith, fellowship, and love. You can learn more at CatholicSingles.com. Catholic Answers Live thanks CatholicSingles.com for their generous support.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Father Wade Menezes talks about the National Catholic Register.
As the National Catholic Register celebrates its 90th anniversary, I think that says a lot about the publication. It presents the teachings of the Church, unabashedly so, and also guides its readers to be even more solidly Catholic themselves.
For a 6-issue free trial of the National Catholic Register, go to ncregister.com and click on the 6 free issue banner, or call 800-421-3230 for your 6 free issues.
Sometimes it happens that we get a guest on of the quality of our guest today, and I just never go to calls. And then people are like, why didn't you? I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it today. I am going to go to the phones. Rod Bennett is our guest. Was there an apostasy? Was there a great apostasy in the early church that needed to be recovered later? Maybe by Martin Luther, maybe by Calvin or Zwingli, or maybe by Joseph Smith. Did that happen? Well, we Catholics say no, and Rod Bennett is here to provide, as he always does, very convincing evidence of that. Our number, 888-318-7884. If you're a Mormon or a Protestant or a secularist or any, and you want to challenge us on this point, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. And if you're a Catholic and you'd like some help knowing how to defend the continuity of the church from Jesus right down till today, you are also welcome to call. Let us go now to Anna in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, listening on the Covenant Network. Anna, do you have a question for Rod?
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is, when was the church first referred to as the Catholic Church, and how did that come about?
Oh, that's a really interesting and good question. And by the way, if you're from Cape Girardeau, then you're sort of a Southerner. So I feel we have something in common.
Oh, you're a Southerner, Rod.
Yeah.
Strangers in a strange land.
Yeah, Southeast Missouri. I appreciate your accent.
The first recorded use of the term Catholic Church was recorded in a letter of Ignatius of Antioch, who was, we think, the second or maybe the third pastor of the church at Antioch after St. Peter. You know, Peter's role as the pastor at Antioch is actually in Scripture. Well, Ignatius came along just a few years later. There's some reason to think that Ignatius knew the apostles personally, and so this is very, very early, very good testimony, some of the earliest testimony we've got. But in 107, he records his use of the term the Catholic Church. He said, and it's interesting, it helps to know what sense he means by the word Catholic, by the context of the quote. Many people will say, well, the word Catholic just means universal, in the sense of everybody who's a Christian is a member of it. Well, that's really true, okay, but that's not really the specific meaning of universal that these early fathers intend. They're always using it in contradistinction to something else. The word Catholic, universal in this sense, what they're stressing is there's only one church. In other words, there's one church founded by Christ, handed down by the apostles, and it's one size fits all. It's one church for everybody. It's universal because it's for everybody. And in that letter, I forget which one it is. It might be his letter to the Philadelphians, I think. It may be the one. But basically he says, the church that's in harmony with the bishop that was put in place by the apostles, that church is the Catholic Church. So whenever you see other bodies that are split off from those original apostolic churches, such as the one that Ignatius pastored at Antioch, then you know that church is some sort of splinter group or dissident body, of which, of course, there had already been a few come into existence by that time. So, yes, I guess it's a long-winded answer, but the word Catholic, used in the sense of the one church established by Christ, is present in 107 A.D. in a letter that survives to this day, just maybe a decade or so after the death of the last apostle. So very, very early.
Okay, Anna?
Yeah. How could I read more of St. Ignatius of Antioch's writings? Are they published in a book, or?
They sure are, and very easy. You can get to it immediately on the internet by just doing it's available for free on the internet. I would suggest the wonderful newadvent.org website, which has thousands of pages of the early fathers, but definitely has all 7 of the authentic letters of Ignatius of Antioch.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very much, Anna. 888-318-7884, the number. Rod Bennett, our guest. We go now to Jose in Lubbock, Texas, listening on Victory Radio. Jose, your comment or question for Rod Bennett.
Hey, Rod Bennett. I appreciate that the Catholic Church has gone back all the way to the antiquity, like you just said, to the hundreds. But when you read through Galatians and Acts, it seems kind of like the church that we know today with all the rules and regulations is more like the Judaizers that Paul was opposed to.
Jose, can you hang on for a minute? This is a hard break, and I put you on without very much time. Can you hang on to finish your point when we come back on the other side?
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that, Jose. Is the church today like the Judaizers or the of the early church? Rod Bennett here to take that question from Jose in Lubbock, Texas, right after this.
Your questions, Catholic Answers, live.
In his new audio presentation, The Very First Fathers, apologist Jimmy Akin takes you on a tour of the earliest Christian writings outside the New Testament. From the most famous figures and most notable works to those lesser known but no less important, this pivotal time in the development of the early church is revealed in fascinating detail. Jimmy shows how, even in the first century after the resurrection, it was necessary to defend and explain truths that are still under attack today, such as the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the perpetual virginity of Mary. The Very First Fathers is a compelling look at the dawn of the Christian age and edifying listening for anyone who wants to understand and defend the full truth of Catholicism. Order your copy of The Very First Fathers today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Wouldn't it be great to have a book to give to anyone to explain exactly why Catholics believe what we believe? Why We're Catholic is the groundbreaking book by apologist Trent Horn. That one book you can give to anyone as a starting point for helping them to find their way into or back to the practice of the Catholic faith. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Author Mike Aquilina says, to read The Apostasy That Wasn't is to live in the 4th century for a vivid moment, knowing the thrills and heroics to which true faith led our ancestors. This is the most enthralling book you will read this year. Order your copy of The Apostasy That Wasn't today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Jose in Lubbock, Texas, listening on Victory Radio. I done you wrong, made you wait through the break, but I appreciate you holding on. If you would continue your point for Rod Bennett.
Well, I was just wondering if there an argument could be made that the Catholic Church represents more of the rules and the regulations and all the structure that the Judaizers had, rather than the freedom that Paul was promoting through Galatians and Acts when he's trying to make the difference prior to when they had that council in Jerusalem where they said, okay, you can go to the Gentiles and we'll stick with the Jews, the Reformed Jews. To me, it just seems that the Catholic Church represents that group more than the churches to the Gentiles.
Well, it's very interesting. There's a common idea in most great apostasy theories, and that is that the early church was simple, had very few rules, was informal, had no officers or hierarchy, no liturgy. All of that's a later accretion, like barnacles accumulating on the bottom of a ship. And the short answer I can give you to this is that if you come in expecting in advance that Christianity will be a simplification of Judaism, then that's a misunderstanding. The two religions are one. In other words, the Hebrew religion prior to the coming of Christ was a revelation from God intended to prepare the world for the arrival of Christ, and there was never intended to be a hard break. There was intended to be a shift in leadership and a shift in focus once the Messiah arrived, but a hard, almost a reboot, where the old covenant had failed and the new covenant is going to be completely different, is an erroneous idea that has crept in. A lot of people forget that Christ leads us in several different places in Scripture to expect that the church will grow through the centuries. He gives us the example of the mustard seed that grows into a huge tree big enough for the birds to find nests in its branches. And the mustard seed and the tree, the finished grown tree, don't look very similar to each other. So, yes, it began very simply. It began with 12 men, and after Christ's ascension, those were who you had. And then they went out and began to make converts. But whenever new questions arose, they provided answers. And I just say that the New Testament alone is full of very complex ideas and an awful lot of rules. And so this preconceived idea that it was just supposed to be a home Bible study with guitars and stuff, which, by the way, I used to be the pastor of one of those, so I don't disparage those completely. But there's a preconceived idea that the church was simple and was meant to remain simple. I would suggest that it wasn't as simple as it's made out to be, and that the 2,000 years of history that we've coped with intelligently have made it less simple than it was then. But the inherent central message of it, that the coming of Christ brought saving grace into the world, and that you and I are saved by getting that grace into our lives, that's very simple and has been there since the very beginning.
Jose?
Well, I appreciate it. I'm part of the non-instrumental sitting around home church, but besides that, it sounded great. Thanks.
Well, God bless you, and God bless your little church, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Steve on Facebook. Oh, by the way, we're talking with Rod Bennett. Rod Bennett, among his books, is The Apostasy That Was, and I keep mentioning that one because that's what we're talking about today, and that's also the one that's published by Catholic Answers Press. The Apostasy That Wasn't, The Extraordinary Story of the Unbreakable Early Church. The basic thesis being that all those who would say at some point the Catholic Church lost its way or ceased to be the bearer of the fullness of the Christian Church are wrong, that hypothesis, that theory, that claim, that assertion is wrong. And wherever it is made, whether it is made by Mormons or Protestants or Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, that's one of the great indicators that it is wrong, is that everybody agrees there was an apostasy, but they all agree to disagree on exactly what the apostasy consisted of and exactly who the prophet was that put things back on the rail. In other words, there wasn't one great apostasy, there are hundreds. And all the people who insist on an apostasy all have different reasons for saying that it happened. So that's an indicator that that the theory is not as sound as it might seem on the surface.
888-318-7884 is the number, 888-318-7884. Rod, on Facebook, Steve says, and I think this is an indication Steve is trying to give of that there was this discontinuity in the early church. He says many of the early Christians, including some of the fathers, repudiated biblical texts such as the Gospel of John, the Epistle to the Hebrews, Jude, James, Peter, and the Revelation of St. John. So if the early church couldn't agree on that kind of stuff, how can you say there was continuity?
Well, that's a really interesting point. The repudiation is the word that's too strong in that statement. We're talking many of the time. We're talking about an early era where, believe it or not, for a very long time after the church began, the church had not ruled definitively on which books were part of Scripture and which ones weren't. In other words, you can't. If you say that the book of Revelation is not the inspired word of God, you can't be going against Christian teaching if the Christian church hasn't ruled on that subject yet. In other words, we're begging the question here. You and I, because you and I know 2,000 years later which books wound up in the final cut.
Yeah.
Because we know that, we can say, well, look, here they disagreed over these books. Therefore, some of them must be wrong, right? If so-and-so says this book is supposed to be in and it isn't, or this father says that it's supposed to be out and it isn't. Well, the problem is here is that it was an open question at that point. This leads into the whole other subject of how the New Testament canon was finally arrived at, and the Old Testament canon too, by the way. That's part of it also. In other words, if you don't, in other words, we can't just assume that God gave us the right answer, the right list of books. He didn't in that sense. In other words, the original Bible that's handed down from the prophets and the apostles does not have an inspired contents page. Yeah. The contents page of the Bible is something that was worked out over really the next 300 years, really. That it makes it sound like it was more up for grabs than it was. There was a basic consensus all along, but there were books where eminent men, great saints on both sides, had different opinions, and sometimes they ended up having the wrong opinion. But again, that had not been made clear to the world yet. And this brings up the church's power to make rulings, binding rulings. In other words, the church was given the church was given by Christ the power to make rulings, to bind and to loose. That's part of the power of the keys that Peter was given. And that binding and loosing is connected with issues like this. So long as it was an open question and it was a matter of debate, it was perfectly permissible to have different viewpoints and to advocate for your own viewpoint. But once the church had made her ruling clear to the world, then the debate stops. And, of course, it did. So that's the answer to the question. And do the fathers differ on other things? Yeah, they differ on all kinds of things, just as perfectly Catholic Orthodox people today can differ about lots of things. And that's because some of the things that Catholics say are of the nature of the faith, things that we're required to believe in, and there's other areas where you're free to have your own opinion. So, and the fathers were just like that. Not every word that comes out of their mouth reflects anything more than their own opinion. But the amazing consensus of opinions between all these different fathers in all parts of the world on matters like the nature of baptism, the nature of the Eucharist, the nature of the episcopal office, things of this type. The amazing unanimity that they have on those subjects is another one of those big picture factoids, one of these bits of evidence.
Yeah.
If all the fathers, in spite of all their different opinions and different national origins and all the rest of it, if all of them agree that baptism is regenerative, in other words, baptism saves,
right.
It's a sacrament. The waters of baptism cleanse from sin. If they all agree on that, as they do, then the only way you can hold a different opinion on the subject is to assume that there was some sort of lost minority of people who believed the evangelical version of baptism and that their opinions and their writings or whatever have been scrubbed from history by the evil Catholic Church, etc. In other words, a conspiracy theory.
Right. So in that process, though, as you tell it in The Apostasy That Wasn't, your book, The Apostasy That Wasn't, as you tell that story, the story of St. Athanasius is an important one in as regards this question of apostasy. Can you tell us about Athanasius?
Yeah. Well, again, Athanasius is important for lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons that he's so central in my book is that I discovered that he was a witness to what the church had believed on the nature of Christ and on the relationship between Christ and his Father, that became a subject of debate at the time of Constantine. After the Council of Nicaea, there was a move within Christianity, within the Roman Empire, to try to create a defective version of the. This is a complex idea, so bear with me for a second.
That's okay.
The Arian crisis was a crisis of people who wanted, for reasons of their own, to reinterpret the divinity of Christ as it had always been understood. And so that amounted to an attack on the what we call the doctrine of the Trinity. So Athanasius was the great hero, the great defender of the full, eternal co-oneness of the Father and the Son. The idea that the divine Son of God had been the Son from all eternity, and that he was co-equal with his Father. Athanasius defended that, not as his own opinion or his own judgment on the matter, but as the opinion of previous centuries. He said the church has always believed that Christ and his Father were one, but at the same time that they're not just two different names for one God, that those two persons are real personalities. Yeah. And yet there's only one God. So it's a little bit of a complex story. One of the reasons the book was fun to write is I kind of felt challenged to make all of that intelligible to ordinary people whose eyes tend to glaze over.
It's funny because we do hear about it during those times. Even the common people in the streets of Nicaea were well versed in these very complex theological ideas. We've maybe lost some of that popular attention to theology.
Well, maybe so. Yeah, it is a shame the degree to which ordinary lay people in every church, ours as well as the Protestant churches, have gotten to the point where their biblical literacy is so terrible. I could be proud of my evangelical co-religionists of the past by being able to say they know their Bible very well. Probably they still know their Bible a little better than the average man in the pew Catholic, but it has sunk pretty low within my lifetime, I'm afraid. A lot of people know a few slogans, a few key phrases from the Bible, and they build their whole faith around that and are content to a lot of times.
Well, I'm just working up. I'm going to work my way up to knowing a few slogans, if I can get there. Rod Bennett is our guest. The Apostasy That Wasn't is the book. We're talking about the myth, really, of the Great Apostasy. There's this idea that there was an underground Catholic or underground Christian church, and that was the true, pure Christianity. Then when it came out into the legal respectability under Constantine, that somehow was lost. I want to ask you about that underground idea when we come back. Rod Bennett, our guest, right back with more right after this.
Call us now with your question on Catholic Answers Live.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Our mission is to transform the world one woman at a time through a spiritual program of formation that helps them to see who they are as daughters of the Most High God and to enjoy the gift that God has given to them by virtue of their femininity.
Women of Grace with Johnette Bankovic-Williams. Tomorrow morning, 11 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization Online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Rod Bennett is our guest, and our topic, well, did it happen? Did the Catholic Church apostatize? Is there a purer, truer Christianity? Before I go back to calls, Rod, I did want to ask you about that idea that really there was this underground Christianity that persisted, and it was the legalization of Christianity, the tolerance of Christianity, and then eventually the preeminence of Christianity that kind of made it lose its way. And maybe a person today, a Protestant today, might say, well, yeah, but there was always that underground Christianity that never did disappear. It was just hidden by this public thing called the Catholic Church.
Well, when you put forward an idea like that,
yes,
it can't just be a speculation. It can't just be a guess based on what you need to be there to justify your theory.
Right.
There has to be some evidence that this church existed. And when you ask for that evidence, I'm afraid too often people who are driven to this hypothesis by their presuppositions have to say, well, the Catholic Church scrubbed the records. All the books were taken and burned, and the heretics themselves were burned, and all, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just telling you that's just simply a conspiracy theory. It's a nutty conspiracy theory. In other words, you're admitting you have no evidence. Nevertheless, it happened somehow anyway. You have to. Well, I mean, you don't have to. You can join the conspiracy theorists, if you'd like. That the Earth is flat and that NASA has faked the photographs and all the rest of it. There are people who are very sincere about that. But if you want to live in the world where facts are verifiable and that there's real evidence that can be examined by both sides, you have to avoid conspiracy theory, and especially conspiracy theories of this airy, evidence-free variety. So, but it's interesting. Here's a bit of evidence you might want to look at. The more you know, as we said at the beginning of the program, the more you know about the church of, say, the 200s A.D., the better positioned you'll be to be able to criticize the difference between that church and the one of the 300s A.D.
Yes.
Keep in mind, Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, that was 325, okay? Many people think, well, before Constantine, the church had no power, so it was innocent of the corrupting influence of power. So, it existed, and it was this pure persecuted church huddling in the catacombs, and as a result, it had this innocence to it. Well, the catacombs had been left far behind by this time. There were large Christian churches openly built on street corners in the Roman Empire. It had been many years since Christians were persecuted actively by the Roman Empire, even though the laws against Christianity were still on the books. But the population of the Christian population of the empire had boomed. It was very open, and everybody knew that about a fifth or even a quarter of the empire by this time had been converted to Christianity. There was no secrets about it anymore. Everybody was fully aware of it. Alas, it wasn't very pure many times either. Eusebius, who was the great church historian who later records the conversion of Constantine and all the rest of it, he says that the church that he grew up in, long before the arrival of Constantine, he says that the church was a mess. I think Origen, another great Christian scholar of that era, says that the church of the mid-200s was whoring. And he gives a list of sins that the churches were infested with during the 200s A.D., and all sorts of things that would curl your hair and stuff. I mean, not much different than Christianity in any age. They're going to be Judases mixed in with the saints. But this idea of the pure, innocent early church huddled in the catacombs, that had been long gone by the time of, the period, say, 250 to 325 A.D. So knowing that that's the truth takes the teeth out of a lot of the myth of, horrible old Constantine came along and gave the church a taste of power. It just isn't true.
It's kind of heartening and disheartening at the same time to think the church is kind of a mess, whether you give her power or you don't. But
well,
yeah,
sinners, made up of sinners.
Amen. Vernon in Florida is up next. Vernon, your question for Rod Bennett. Vernon, you there with us? I know he's there. Really?
Hello.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, hey, Vernon,
Yeah.
there you are. You have a question for Rod Bennett?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Happy to.
Yeah, I worked years ago in an engineering department, and the guy in the cubicle next to me was a very strong Catholic believer. He's one of the most solid Catholic men I think I've ever known. He was just a good one. And we used to have discussions about the Scripture, and one of the things he told me was that the Catholic Church has been led by a succession of popes throughout history. And if you trace it back, it goes clear back to Peter. And he referenced the Scripture, Matthew 16:15. You're probably very familiar with it. I'm sure you get this question before, where Jesus says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church."
Right.
Okay. Was he right that that's where the authority of Christ up through the popes comes from, according to Catholics, or was he wrong?
Well, that's certainly one of the verses. The next verse is actually a bit more important. I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom, Jesus says to Peter. And this is very important to recognize that the throne that Jesus is going to sit on as the new Davidic king in the new kingdom is the throne of King David. And if you go back to the story of King David, there's a very important story where David takes the keys to the kingdom away from an unworthy minister and gives it to a new minister. And what the keys of the kingdom is not just something Jesus is making up on the spot. It's actually something that comes along with that Davidic throne that Christ is inheriting. So, and of course, anybody who had a Jewish education at the time of the New Testament and read this understood what that meant. Those keys to the kingdom were like saying, you're my designated stand-in. In other words, if when the time comes that I'm not going to be present on a day-to-day basis, I need somebody to pinch hit for me, so to speak, if you don't mind the metaphor, that when Christ is not on earth, he leaves somebody to take care of the day-to-day task of running his kingdom while he's away. And so that's implied in that idea of the keys. So yes, the teaching of the church from the very beginning, and again, the early fathers give us a good indication that this teaching is there as early as there are any records, that Jesus had a special role for the apostles first, and for their successors, the bishops. But among these bishops, one bishop in particular had a special job of the carrying of those keys. Okay? The other apostles are given the power to bind and loose, okay? But only Peter is told that he's being given the keys. So yes, that passage in Matthew is central to our understanding that Jesus left somebody in charge. Most Christians delight in the idea that I'm in charge, just me and my Bible. But the Catholic idea is that Jesus actually left somebody in charge, and that man made successors, and that office of carrying those keys still exists in the church and is meant to exist in the church by the divine command, the command of Christ. So, yeah, absolutely, that's not the whole story, but it is an important part
Vernon?
of what we mean when we say that Jesus left a vicar.
Yeah,
he left somebody to carry the keys.
What do you make of that, Vernon?
Okay, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Sure. Okay, when in that scripture in Matthew, he says, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Well, Peter, of course, means rock or stone, and it's a masculine word in the Greek.
Oh.
When he says, and upon this rock I will build my church, he uses a feminine word, which could not be pointing at Peter. It has to be pointing to something else. If you look what the Greek says, it's a mass of rock.
You're right, Vernon. I'm sorry because we're going to run up right up against the end. We have dealt with this question about the feminine and the masculine use in Matthew's gospel. I'm going to just point you to an article right now because it is very important that we do make this point very clear. We do not base the idea that Peter is the first pope simply on this piece of text. It's not a proof text kind of thing. In the context of the entire New Testament and the tradition of the early church, we understand what Christ intended. And you can look at many, many passages, including feed my sheep, feed my lambs, and all throughout the scripture, Peter plays that central role. So I just want to say that clearly because we do hear this objection sometimes about this text. There's a wonderful article on it called Peter's Authority by Father Dwight Longnecker, Peter's Authority at Catholic.com. I hope that you will read it. Rod Bennett, I'm sorry I had to do that really quickly, but I'm very grateful that you were willing to spend this hour with us. Thank you.
Oh, it's been fun. I enjoy it any time.
The Apostasy That Wasn't is Rod Bennett's one among Rod Bennett's books. The Extraordinary Story of the Unbreakable Early Church. You can get it at on our website at shop.catholic.com or probably anywhere that good Catholic books are sold. If you'd like to meet Rod Bennett in person, come on to our conference September 26th through 29th right here in sunny San Diego, where we talk about how the early church was the Catholic Church. Jesus Christ is the light of the nations. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Answers Live.